If we shadows have offended, they but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend.
Greetings, this is Burn Power, and this is Gravity from Above, explorations in the world of puppetry, specifically European puppet theaters, which I've been fascinated with for years. And today what we're going to do is a general and serious survey of the art of the marionette, the stringed puppet. And I think you're going to find it interesting. If you are a scholar on the subject, you're not going to see anything new, but you might see some very interesting archival material here that you haven't seen before. If you're new to the subject of marionettes, I think you'll be surprised. And if you're not new, but have been working with marionettes for a while, I think I will have some inspiration here that you haven't considered before, ways to work with those strings and those puppets that, well, you never know. It might influence you in some way. So let's begin. What is a marionette? Simply put, a marionette is a puppet which is controlled, worked, operated by strings or perhaps wires. The word seems to have come into use around 1620 in France, and it literally means a little small Mary. And that comes from a diminutive of the Old French mariole, which means figurine or picture of Mary, some sort of image of Mary that is three-dimensional. So, mariole was a diminutive of Marie, Mary, so it's essentially a little Mary. So there you are, marionette. Interestingly enough, though, the French have a word, marionette, which means all puppets. And to say string puppets or puppets on a wire, they say marionnette à fil. But in most languages, some form of the word marionette means string puppet. So Italian is marionetta, Japanese is marionetto, Georgian is marionetti, and you see this all over. Marionette in English, but something similar in German and Dutch. Basically every language has some sort of form of marionette. That means string puppet. Although the Chinese have a word which I'm going to probably pronounce wrong. Mua or mua, something like that. I'm missing it because I'm not getting the tones right, because Chinese is so difficult with the tone structure, but you get the point. Marionettes are found all over the world. In India, for instance.
अरे वाह भैया वाह.
China does have marionettes. Armenia, here's some Armenian puppets. Africa has marionettes, although I would say they're probably a more recent arrival. In Latin America, you have marionettes, although interestingly about this drunken marionette, it is operated by a Latin American puppeteer, but the actual puppet was carved by a friend of mine who is Czech. And of course, North America has marionettes, and these marionettes are from the Bob Baker marionette troupe in the Los Angeles area. But since my expertise is mostly in European puppets, we're going to look at Europe. And of course, the most famous marionette in history has to be Pinocchio, who, of course, is famous for wanting to become a real child. Other famous marionettes would be Spabel and Hrvinek, who are from the Czech Republic, but also are famous in Slovakia and Germany, and probably Austria knows them too. Faust, the classic story of the man who sells his soul to the devil, is often done as a marionette show, particularly in the Czech Republic. And these images are from a show I saw done by the Czech puppet troupe Handegote, which were done in an authentic style which could have been done 200 years ago, with the exception of the electric lights in the front. Everything else was done old style.
Vezi Stáfl, pak si něco kádáš. Navíš mi můj štuc. Já tu viděl nějakou divou drůbež zplavat, abych mohl na té vodě své lekraci dívat. Pak jste, ty mě umíš kunírovat. Kdybych to byl věděl, já bych se do tobě do služby nedal. Ty mě umíš kunírovat. Vidíš, Juchu, umíl jsem napřed sobě, že si na té vodě užalky zahrajeme. Tak mi opáš. Fauste, co jsi to vzpomněl na běžícího nějaký užalky stavěl? Ty mě týráš! Já těle pravím, hned mi opatří! Fauste, ty mě můžeš kunírovat. Fauste, tady máš užalky.
So what are the origins of the marionette? I think most scholars agree that some form of marionette probably started in India back before recorded history. And part of the reason for that was it was not allowed to use human beings as actors to portray the gods, so they use these little figures. Although there is a separate lineage, and when I spoke with Henryk Jurkowski, the late great puppet historian from Poland, he thought there was also a lot of independent invention, because it is natural to tie a string to something and to pull it. I think a further development can be seen in the Greco-Roman world. This is called the Massimo doll. Now, it is a doll. We don't see any holes for moving the puppet as a theatrical demonstration. However, this sort of design is obviously going to become very important in European puppetry later, and is much more developed than what we saw in India. So again, this is an ancient Roman doll. Now, one of the oldest styles of puppetry is the Sicilian marionette. And this still takes place in Italy today, but the style definitely goes back into the Middle Ages. We know Sicilian marionettes, I think before the year 1400 or so at least.
Chi sono questi due che combattono?
Uno è Renard e uno è Perrault.
But what makes them different than what we think of as marionette today is the rod coming out of the head, which can control the movements of the puppet quite quickly. I actually visited the Teatro Carlo Magno, the Charlemagne Theater in Palermo. I highly recommend visiting that, but they have several other theaters there as well, and all through Sicily there are these Sicilian puppet theaters. They are all based on the legends of Charlemagne fighting the Moors in Poitiers in the Middle Ages. And I had a chance to meet Enzo Mancuso, who ran this theater. You can see his legs jumping up and down there. Fascinating stuff, very loud, with a hand crank barrel organ. But yeah, the old legends. He makes a great point at the beginning of telling the children coming to see this that there's a real difference between legend and history. Essentially, he's just got one string on the hand for fighting, and then he's controlling the head with the rod, which makes it actually very quick to turn. But one thing these puppets can do that most other puppets cannot do is he can actually insert the sword. He can not only take the sword out of its scabbard, he can insert it back in, and I have no idea exactly how that works. I almost think it has to be something like magnets or something like that, which draws it back in, but it's pretty fascinating. Now, this style seems to have moved north at some point several hundred years ago, and the oldest continuing puppet theater in Europe is the Toone Marionette Theater in Brussels, and it's run at this point by the Géal family. Nicolas Géal is running it, but there's José Géal sitting in the back there as people are coming in. Now, you'll notice this audience, it's not children. People come from all over the world to watch this, and they're often very funny shows, and sometimes the sense of humor is a little on the bawdy side. This is Nicolas Géal.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir! Bonsoir! Dames en heren, goedenavond! Goedenavond! Ladies and gentlemen, good evening! Good Très bien. Vous allez voir un grand classique, c'est Dracula.
And this is from a version of the Three Musketeers. And again, you'll see the rod coming out of the head, and it is controlled slightly differently. The hands are. All of the puppeteers are above it, and that's the Baroque theater style where you have these different panels going back. I love that style of puppet theater stage.
Je jure, madame. Allez, je suis une fois curieuse. Allez, tenez, prenez vite ce petit coffret, mettez ça bien dans votre gilet, hein, que personne ne le voit. Dans ce coffret, il y a un collier, eh ben je vous le donne, gardez-le, en souvenir de moi.
But what's fascinating about this style is that Nicolas Géal does not do the controlling of the puppets. He is not the actual puppeteer, although I'm sure he knows exactly how to do it. But rather, he is reading all the character parts himself, and his troupe is doing all the movements. Let's listen to him.
Oui, ben c'est justement ce qu'elle m'a répondu aussi. Et où se cache-t-elle, ta femme? Vous savez qu'elle s'est échappée? Le savez-vous? Non, monseigneur, je ne le savais pas. C'est seulement après, en prison, que je l'ai su, qu'on me l'a dit.
And as you can see, he's quite a comic actor doing this. And I've seen several different plays there. And this is from his version, a comic version of Romeo and Juliet.
Trois fois, j'ai dû intervenir. Trois fois, j'ai dû me déranger.
This is from the Toone Marionette Theater's version of Dracula. And while being funny, it also manages to convey some very interesting moods in puppetry. Let's watch some of this. I love the lighting here.
Salut, Autonomy! Beste catches and crutches! Tremblez! Je suis Dracula! Amen? Y'a personne ici. Furte, j'ai raté mon entrée. Ah, ce voyage m'a donné soif. Sur le bateau, j'ai croqué tout le monde. Cric, crac, crunch. Même le capitaine. Cric, crac, crunch. Pour finir, il n'y avait plus que des biscottes, sans sel. Dégueulasse! Moi je n'aime pas ça. Hein? Ah, j'ai faim, nom de dégueu! Le grand air, ça creuse! Cric, crac, crunch!
What I like about this is that this sort of mood and lighting really shows that the marionette is not just a child's plaything. It's not just cute little stories for children. And truthfully, the marionette can convey any kind of story. They were often used for Shakespeare.
De quelqu'un! Vite! Transformons-nous! Allez! Ich fliege weg!
Now, the next development comes a little bit later, and it is the full stringed marionette. This is what we typically think of as the marionette. And often, these strings, this is the Amsterdam Marionette Theater, often these kinds of marionettes have up to 9 or more strings on them. They are quite complicated. I own a Czech marionette with 9 strings, and I can tell you, you're starting to get into the realm of working something like a musical instrument. This is not simple, because while the faces don't move, the mouths generally don't move on marionettes. You have to convey everything through subtle movement. Now, these are the kinds of puppets they have at this theater. And I would suggest, with anything that I mention here, go to the Toone Marionette Theater if you go to Brussels. I mean, I would say that's the reason to go to Brussels. It's certainly one of the most interesting things there. Visit the Amsterdam Marionette Theater and some of the other places that I mentioned. It's just important for you to see these things in reality and not just on a screen. But what you'll notice, the great thing about this particular footage is showing you the backstage, how high up the marionettes are. They're not right next to it the way that the Toone Marionette Theater was. They need the space to move around. We'll see this later when we look at some footage from the Salzburg Marionette Theater. Now, I'm not even sure what this performance was, but as you can see, we're out of the realm of anything that could be vaguely considered a children's performance. Children could certainly appreciate this, but it is no longer simply a child's toy we're looking at. So let's look at some traditional European marionettes. One thing you'll often notice when you look at older footage of marionette performances is they'll show you parts of the play, but they'll always intercut with pictures of children interacting. And that is, I think, the general prejudice that marionettes are just for children. I think in America, that's often the way most people think of it. Puppets are just for children. But in fact, as we will see later, puppets are not just for children. And this is actually a fettuccine. We'll run into this a little bit later. It's a trick puppet. This was used for the kind of vaudeville music hall stages, the burlesque stage, where the puppeteer was just a quick act, and they needed something to just simply be a little miniature wonder for people to look at. Something like a circus, as you can see in this particular example. I think one of the reasons I find the traditional European marionette so fascinating is because with all those strings, it is the most advanced form. Now, you can make marionettes with less strings. You could probably do one with 3 strings very easily. But the more strings you add, the more control you need, and also the more practice you need. Now, in this case, you have a very different kind of things. We had been seeing comic marionettes, and these are still comic, quite clearly. But what's fascinating about these is they're just little people. I've sat at the Salzburg Marionette Theater and watched puppets on the stage, and they literally look like miniature people. So there's the controlling mechanism. Here's a slightly different kind of theater, more of a personal one. You can see he's not as high up as some of the other marionettes were. There's a whole study to be done on the faces of marionettes. They generally have an expression that can be read either as serious or as comic, depending on how they really turn. So they have this kind of strange expression. Check out the piano work on this guy. What is that, Beethoven? But marionettes, I find, are also the kind of puppets that are used most in analogies. If we talk about a politician being a puppet of the financial interests, or if we say that, that a man is a puppet for a certain woman, or we often use this negative analogy of the puppet of someone being connected or being operated by the strings of someone else. We rarely use that with the hand puppet. Now here's another illustration, an old bit of footage of a fantoccini. That's the Italian word for these trick puppets. And I have a friend in the Czech Republic who makes these. And essentially, all the parts come apart and then reassemble. That's the trick. It's probably easy to get things to come apart, but how do you get them to reassemble? Puppets, besides obviously being useful for comedy, marionettes really seem to specialize in the folktale and the exotic. That is, traditionally, they have been used in things like folktales, fairy tales, but also to take you to places or tell you stories like the Arabian Nights, places that a person in the past could never travel to. Here is a little bit from The Three Little Pigs. We have the wolf here, and let's listen to him as he encounters I really like Dimitri's language for he has the wolf coming along going oop la la, oop la la. It's really funny. But then he sits on a hedgehog.
C'est quoi ça? Un porc-épic? Ouh, un porc-épic. Tu veux faire un tour de la terre, toi?
Also at the Theatre Perruchet, Théâtre Perruchet, in Brussels, they did another story, how the elephant got his long nose, and this is the crocodile for that. Again, visit these theaters. What we're looking at now are images from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, done by an English theater many, many years ago. And in fact, the Czechs used to wander around in the 18th century and 19th century through the villages doing Shakespeare plays with their puppets. Now, as I said, the marionettes are particularly good at exotica. Particularly, the Arabian Nights were a real source of fascination for people who knew nothing of the Middle East. We're now going into the Little Angel Theatre, which still exists, and again, go see it in London. And here, but this is from the 1960s, and this is one of their, again, Arabian Nights. Now today, people have some sort of problem with depicting other cultures in a way which is, not exactly accurate. But I don't have that problem with marionettes, because this isn't about a demonstration of reality. This is about telling stories and using your mind for fantasy. And I don't think it has much to do with some of the narratives people are telling these days about cultural appropriation. We're going to look at Tony Sarg, an American puppeteer, and we're going to watch some clips from his own little Arabian Nights spectacle. And there you have the man wooing his Middle Eastern lover. Here's someone smoking a hookah pipe. And then the dancer comes along. Quite an interesting thing. And in the end, Tony Sarg himself comes out on stage. And we're going to run into Tony Sarg just a little bit later with something else. Meanwhile, back in Israel, this is old footage of a show. Children watching this, but as you look at this, this isn't simply exotica. It's some sort of fairy. Or is it Middle Eastern? Very unusual imagery. And one of the things I like about this sort of imagery is it just gives you something different than you normally encounter in daily life. I mean, I would much rather watch one of these old shows than I would a Disney live, quote-unquote, live-action version of Aladdin, which would just be annoying as I could possibly stomach. How do marionettes work? This shows you the basic underlying features of the marionette. There is the control mechanism. There is the leg bar that moves the leg back and forth. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 strings on this particular marionette. That's a lot to think about while you're moving it. Fortunately, this isn't a very big marionette. Some of the Czech marionettes are much bigger, made out of linden wood, and require developing a little arm strength to use them over and over. And here this man is showing you how they walk. And if you follow this, you could actually go online and look for how to operate a marionette, and you'll see this video in full with a man explaining how to move these things. It's not that simple, but it's not that hard as well. Anyone can get the basics. To become an artist, you have to spend time doing it. Now here we are at the Salzburg Marionette Theater. And again, look how high they are up. Now what you also will notice is the puppets are in a well below them, and they are moving around that circle, often exchanging puppets to move past each other. Now here you see the puppeteer moves the puppet, very subtle movements, and notice how they pass the puppet through the person. And look at all those strings. This is real artistry. So watch how she demonstrates how you move it. Each little movement creates another kind of thing. Now this control mechanism has an extra little triangle beneath it, which really gives you some extra control there. And you can see she's moving. This is the Salzburg Marionette Theater in Salzburg, Austria. I highly recommend going. It's one of the most expensive shows. I think last time I went it was 30 euros. That's quite a bit for a puppet show, and it's worth it. These look the most realistic imaginable. They are performing to Mozart operas quite often, although they do have one version of The Sound of Music, very, very Salzburg. Are they touristy? A little bit, but there's still, the artistry is so good, I really recommend seeing them. Now let's see, you don't have that theater. Very few places have a theater that good. What can you do? Well, here's a demonstration in Georgia. Not a lot of money in Georgia for puppets, but nevertheless, how many strings have we got here? Not that many. And I think that's about three strings or so on each puppet. And yet, they're communicating. It's just children operating this. But, the theater isn't that complex. It's not a theater. It's more like children in a class learning these things. To Georgian music, of course. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you was done, I believe it was back in the early 1960s, late 1950s, and it's called the Handkerchief Ballet. You can look this up and watch the whole thing with its original music. I've changed the music for copyright reasons, but it's just one string marionettes. Anybody can make this, and in fact I had a class here in Tbilisi, Georgia, where I had all the children making these. Once you master the technique of making a one-string puppet, it is amazing how much you can do. You have to find a really, really light piece of string. And of course what helps sell this is the backdrop. But we're going to watch more characters get involved with this, but I'm convinced there's only one puppeteer here. And in fact, I'm sure of it. There was just one man doing all the puppetry. So one puppet goes off, and then look at the intricate nature of this. This is evidently the princess who is, she's looking for a suitor in this piece, but it's all done as a ballet. There are no words to this. You don't need a lot of fancy stuff to make. I mean, you should just go and start making puppets right now. You can also do these with 3 strings tied to pieces of cloth. So here you have another piece coming out, another piece. This is really abstract stuff. And so what this is telling us is that not only can you make simple puppets, but suddenly the artistry in this is through the roof. These may be the simplest of all the marionettes, but the artistry is absolutely amazing. And that's what we're about to see. So let's talk about marionettes and art. The first thing we're going to see here, we're back in America, and this is from Bob Baker's Marionette Theater in Southern California, which if you're in the Los Angeles area and you have a couple of hours to wait through the traffic, you should go look at this, Bob Baker. But this isn't a particularly great artistic statement, but as a technique, it's fantastic. What they have done here is they've used the Czech black theater technique and used black lights and created this incredible vision of glowing skeletons in the dark with, of course, phosphorescent paints. And while this is kind of just an entertainment, it starts to give you some of the idea that marionettes can be used for far more than just light entertainment. They can also provide, this is a vision, really. If it was done slightly more seriously, I think it would produce something, not too deep, but maybe along the lines of The Nightmare Before Christmas by Tim Burton. Now, the next thing we're going to watch is from a Russian communist Soviet-era musical called The Marionette. And this is a musical number in this mostly non-puppet oriented film. But it's a fantastic musical number where a marionette is used as a prop, and you start to get the idea that the marionette is being used in a very allegorical way in this. Now, in fact, it is a political statement, being Soviet propaganda, and ultimately the film is about how, it's the rich, evil capitalists who are dangling people in their strings. But one could easily turn around and say it is the controlling puppeteers of the Soviet Union controlling people as well. That is the nature of the marionette image. Although, I would say that's a very shallow. People who only see the puppet as a negative image really don't understand how much more can be said with the puppet. But it's a fantastic dance number. I suspect Stalin probably saw some Busby Berkeley and said, "We need this, da." And I think, besides anything directly related to the overall plot, this dance sequence kind of just sticks out like a sore thumb. I think whoever choreographed this had much more on his mind. I can't even begin to tell you what this suggests, but it is fantastic as art. There was, in fact, at the beginning third of the 20th century, quite a bit of relationship between the puppet and the modernist artists. And this seems to be the tail end of kind of the constructivist era in the Soviet Union before Stalin decided to cancel them all, kill a few people, and make sure everyone was doing socialist realism. This is a guy named Henk Boerewinkel, Dutch, And look at this puppet. Now, I'm not sure what the story is on this, but it doesn't matter. It's obviously some sort of spectral, ghostly figure. But you suddenly realize your marionette does not have to be a little homunculus or even an animal. This just suggests so much more, just as the handkerchief ballet did. This suggests so much more that can be done with marionettes. And the transparency is just incredible.
De wind gaat nu door de nacht. Zie hoe het duister dieper wordt.
Now, a great French marionettist, Philippe Gentil, is doing a classic routine here where the marionette, in the form of the Pierrot clown, is coming conscious of himself as a marionette. And so he wants his autonomy. And so he begins to free himself. And as he does, by the time he pulls the last string off, and of course there are hidden strings you don't see, so you can see these white strings. But by the time he is done, well, it's a very interesting analogy. Suddenly you realize that the marionette is not simply an analogy for being controlled by forces outside of yourself. It is also an analogy to being connected to the world. As one of my puppeteer friends in France once said, we all have strings attached to us. And indeed we do. And if you cut all of the strings attached to you, you no longer can function. So in a way, you could say this connects us back to God. It connects us to nature. The more we cut ourselves off and become autonomous, the more we kill ourselves. Well, what a message. And what a message we need to hear in our times. Now, you may remember Tony Sarg. Well, Tony Sarg did something very interesting. Was it great art? Not necessarily. Yet it paves the way for some very interesting art. Tony Sarg created the Macy's Parade balloon. And if you think about this for a moment, you've got a large balloon structure floating above people being controlled by strings. He figured out an unusual principle here, and that is that you can actually have the puppet float and be controlled from below, because these are puppets. They are balloon puppets. Massive, huge balloon puppets. He actually used this dragon creature. When it was on, I believe it was the Coney Island, Brighton Beach area, one of these areas in New York City, where he had it actually on the beach when he first brought it out the first time, and everyone came to look at it. I think it's just fascinating. Now, I'm purposely showing you old footage here because the new footage has a lot of commercial characters, whereas these characters, these original ones from the 30s and 40s, do not suggest the kind of overwhelming commercial aesthetic we have today. And then taking this concept of the outdoor puppet, the large outdoor puppet, one step, well, many steps further, is the troupe Royal Deluxe out of Nantes in France. They don't really perform in Nantes. They actually, what they do is they are hired by different cities around the world, Liverpool, Sydney, London, Paris, to do these shows with these massive puppets that they create. There's a large dog, there's a girl, this particular show is a large dog, a girl looking for her father who is a diver, deep sea diver, and he's in his diving bell suit here. But these are massive. You can see in red on the side, they're the puppeteers, and they're using a crane. But these are marionettes. It's ropes, it's cable, but we're still talking about the marionette principle. And I think that is important to understand, that this principle can be taken. So I have yet to see anyone do small helium balloons as puppets, but certainly it could be done. And these people, this becomes a spectacular. I generally don't like super huge puppets as art, but nevertheless, I think these people have proved, Byrne, you're not always right. So, I don't know when you could see these, because it would really depend on whatever city and what they were hired to do. And I'm not sure if they're still doing it. I think I remember some issue where they maybe were going to stop doing these, but don't quote me on that. Nevertheless, look at the movement on this thing. And of course, people, if you want a big event for your city, this is a big event. And I think it brings people together. Puppetry, again, it's the real. It's tangible. It's tactile. You're seeing this in reality. Now, let's just a brief word about stringed puppets in films. This is Jan Švankmayer's version of Don Juan. In Czech, it's Don Shane. Or is it Don Shine? Or something like that. One of the things that's interesting about this is he's only playing with the concept of the marionette. Now, look what he's done to the face of this. They had a sword fight, and he lost his face, which is, of course, a brilliant Jan Švankmajer technique. This is a Czech puppet film done by the great Jan Švankmajer. But one thing I want to point out is that the puppets actually have no strings attached to them. The puppet mechanism is at the top of the puppet, unconnected to anything. Very fascinating concept. And those are actually real people in masks, puppet masks. I mean, talk about turning the image inside out. Now, this next one is from a friend of mine, Radek Baran, who is with the troupe Buchty a Lotky, which means cakes and puppets, in the Czech Republic, and he did a film which I recommend looking for called Malý Pán, which means the little man.
Stačí vyslovit otázky a dozvíme se všechno. Fido, 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 probuď se, Fido. Tohle se nemělo stát. Ty si měla přežít, protože...
What I love about this is it's puppets outdoors, simple marionettes outdoors in the real world. Malý Pán. Thanks for coming with us today. This is Byrne for Gravity from Above, encouraging you to support local puppeteers. Go to a marionette show, especially support those who seem to be doing something a little extra with it. And while you're here on the channel, there's lots of other puppetry related videos, interviews, images from shows. There's even a lecture or two that I've done on the subject of puppetry. You need to investigate more. Thanks for coming. We'll meet again. By the way, some of you may be wondering, where's the documentary, Byrne? Where's Gravity from Above? And the truth is, it's a lot closer to completion than you know. However, I am being held up by the fact that I need money to complete it, particularly to get the translations done. I've spent enough time doing this to be able to edit it now, so I've increased my skills. But if you feel like helping, You can leave a contribution through the PayPal link that's below in the description, and you can specifically say for translation in the note to me. If you say that, I will know you want me to translate this video. I do need a couple of $1,000s. A few people have already started to contribute. You can contribute too. Thank you very much for your patience waiting for what I hope will be a really fascinating documentary once it gets done. And I hope it's this year, 2021. Was that poetry?
Popelem vám skalím hlavy! Bude konec vaší slávy!
Lucie! Oui, pas op, il y a quelqu'un. Vite, transformons-nous.